Tonight we have the chance to hear about the value of Synergy from the perspective of the people and the organizations who have helped to make Synergy Alberta possible. I'm not sure if everybody is aware, but the three organizations that are represented here tonight, the Alberta Energy Regulator, and the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, they are the funding partners for Synergy Alberta. And they provide the budget that Gary and Brenda do their work with and make things happen. So these are important people, and I know that we all hope that they continue to provide that funding for Synergy Alberta for many years to come. So we've asked them tonight to be able to come and share their perspective on what they see as the value of Synergy. And of course, these folks have a really difficult task tonight because the sessions today, some of them were an hour and a half long and there were several speakers, but we're only taking about 45 minutes or so tonight. So we're asking the speakers to be quite succinct in their comments about what they see as the value of Synergy, because we do want to have time for questions as well afterwards. I want to point out again that we're looking for all of the conversations this evening to be grounded in respect. Ask you to keep that in mind as you ask your questions. And we're also focusing on questions tonight that are along this theme of the value of Synergy and where Synergy may go in the future. So if you have questions that are more at that operational level, we'd ask you to hang on to those, talk to somebody after the session tonight, or carry on the conversation about those tomorrow. So I think, you guys have mics now? Yeah, okay. Well, I'll keep talking while we get that. They'll probably have to turn it on there, Dave. So I'll just take a minute to introduce our first panel speaker tonight. It's Dave Price. He's the Vice President of Operations at Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. I'm sure he's known to many of you. And you can read more in the program about each of these speakers, but I will say that each of them have a broad range and depth of experience in the oil and gas industry, and they bring a lot of knowledge and varied perspectives with them. Dave's work has included areas environment, health and safety, industry stakeholder relations, land liability management, and various other regulatory issues. So he's clearly got a broad range of experience to draw on. So I'll ask Dave to begin on the topic of value of energy.
All right, well, thank you, Carla. A couple of things. When it was framed for me for this discussion, there were some ideas put forward as to things I might think about and talk about. One of them was energy literacy. One is the value of synergy groups and Synergy Alberta. Notions around social license to operate, and the fact that this organization seems to be growing. So I want to talk a little bit about each of those topics. Before I begin, though, particularly to inform what I want to say around the energy literacy piece, I want to provide a little bit of context about the oil and gas industry right now. And I don't think it's any big real surprise, but just the notion that there's fundamental change going on for us as an industry right now. And then that change manifests in a few ways. One is the fact that we're moving to more unconventional resources that we're looking to develop. And those resources are things like shale and tight oil and gas plays. And that really is a game changer for our industry. We're finding that it's much more abundant resource in the world than anybody thought about. But in basic terms, although we call it unconventional, it's essentially different ways that we have to try and produce that product. So that's directional drilling, hydraulic fracturing, which I know are topical discussions these days. And certainly oil sands is the other area where this industry is changing and moving to. And not to forget that there's the whole conventional part of the business that we have been doing for decades that continues to be important to us. The second thing that's changing, though, is our marketplace. It's shifting dramatically for us. Our natural gas marketplace has traditionally been the United States. There's a massive infrastructure of networks, a pipeline, and to get that product to market. What we found is that the U.S. has a great abundance of those resources as well. And so what is our traditional customer is who we compete with now. They are providing the natural gas into their own marketplace and, in fact, into Eastern Canada. So what that means for us is the need to be nimble and a new imperative to find new markets. And those new markets are, in essence, largely in Asian countries. So there's lots of talk about how we get our product in that direction. And we're not the only ones trying to do that, so there's a need for urgency from our perspective to compete in the global marketplace as we move along. So in essence, it's a newness for us in our business. And as we go about moving in that direction, we know it raises a number of questions. What do we mean by the unconventional resources? Can they be developed, or how can they be developed safely and responsibly? And what does that mean for Albertans and Canadians? And what does it mean for the landowners and the communities that we're operating in? So all of that was my context for the notion or the discussion of energy literacy that we think is a relevant topic for discussion. And really, it's looking for ways to help generate the breadth of understanding of the things that those things I just talked about. So the more that we can become aware of the resource, the marketplace, the regulatory, the environmental issues and controls, the more we as industry can understand the issues and concerns that the public have, the more and the better we can have those conversations, particularly in the venue of groups like this, to help inform the discussions, the debate, and the direction and where everybody would like to see things move. So CAP obviously recognizes the importance of energy literacy. We do that through our programming and partnerships with Inside Education, as an example, with the Canadian Geographic magazine, with various sponsors across the country. And we do our own information sourcing through our websites and fact books. But we know we can't do that alone. We know that there's a credibility issue that needs to be managed. So we think that others need to be part of that discussion, entities like this, entities like academic institutions. I want to shift now to the need for social license to operate. And it's an interesting term and concept, but I think it lacks definition. Everybody uses that phrase, but nobody really, I think, is understanding in a common sense what it means. But it implies a power beyond the regulatory and the legal, and it's one of the most significant and consuming things that our industry is thinking about right now. Where traditionally we'd know and get our approvals and be off to do our business, there's a lot of discussion around, so what does it mean once you've got your regulatory license when we haven't moved the public along in that regard? So what is it? How do we get it? How do we maintain it? How does it vary with respect to the range of issues that exist out there? How does it relate to the traditional policy and regulatory license? And what's industry's role, and what's government's role, and the regulator's role in navigating that regulatory and social license sort of paradigm? And I don't think the answers are easy, and it's why we continue to work with government and urge them to be more clear about what their policies and regulatory expectations are, and have that understood and communicated out to the public and stakeholders, and talk about their new vehicles like the land use framework and the new single regulator to help people understand where the government is going in that regard. But to take it to its basic premise, if we don't have that buy-in, that social license, I think there's the risk that, at least in the long term, the regulatory and the environment under which we operate and the policy environment under which we operate will be at risk, and we'll have to make sure that bringing the communities along, bringing Albertans along, bringing Canadians along around whether or not we've got the right mix of policy and regulatory, I think is important. I want to talk a little bit about Synergy as an innovative approach in stakeholder relations. I think the concept serves as a unique forum to bring together industry with landowners, with governments, and the regulator. And in my mind, it really is an Alberta invention that others across Canada, in fact, even across the globe, have been looking at for some time. I think it has its roots somewhat in entities like the Clean Air Strategic Alliance, or CASA. I think those CASA and Synergy have helped inform the notion of the Alberta Water Council. So I think we've got some momentum around the notion of synergy in a variety of aspects, and I think Alberta has been a sort of a key inventor of that notion. And so what does it do? Well, I think it provides the ability to improve understanding through the collaborative and constructive discussions that go on within Synergy Alberta and within the individual Synergy groups as well. So I think it really is a catalyst for that conversation to identify concerns and look for constructive solutions. And I think one of the notions that was posed to me as I thought about this is the notion of recognition of this conference as an important fixture for stakeholder engagement. I think the only thing I'd add is that this serves to reinforce the model and provides an opportunity to evaluate the dialogue and further the collaborative engagement. I think it should provide a means to review progress and test for challenges. And I think finally, my last comment is, I think there's an opportunity to be even more leading in the areas of energy literacy and social license and communication and informing what that policy environment should look like. So I'll stop there and move on. Okay.
Thanks for that, Dave, and for bringing out those themes around energy literacy, social license, and kind of acknowledging that this is a forum for continuous improvement in that dialogue as well. Next, we'll hear from Doug Lammy, who's the Executive Director of the Strategic Energy Secretariat for Alberta Energy. So Doug is all about strategy, and part of their strategy includes providing funding for Synergy Alberta, and Doug brings with him to that role, again, a wide variety of experience within Alberta Energy, working on various projects there. So I will invite Doug to share his views on the value of synergy.
Thank you very much, Carla. Absolutely incredible 2 days we've had here today, so I want to thank Synergy for putting on such a great event. It was a pleasure to be here and actually hear some of the dialogue. We had some fascinating presentations yesterday. I think the most powerful piece, though, was the conversations that we were having around the tables. The open dialogue, the respectful dialogue was just incredible. We're in a very unique and positive situation here in Alberta. We're sitting on some enormous natural resources. We've just reached the 4 million mark for people, for population. We have huge oil sands reserves. That puts us third in the world for oil sands reserves, 170 billion barrels. Significant natural gas, both conventional and unconventional. When you look at some of the shale and other resources, tight sand gas resources, we're looking at over 1,000 TCF of gas and more as new technology unfolds and is able to tap into that and actually develop it economically. It's going to be a huge positive for us here in Alberta. You look at some of the other traditional sources like coal, 1,000 years of coal supply based on current consumption rate right now. So really puts us with a great endowment that we can use to our benefit here in Alberta. We're seeing a lot of continued economic growth as well here in Alberta. Both increasing world demand is driving the need for more energy. A lot of that is projected to be coming from Alberta, and we can benefit from that. We're seeing some projections of growth in oil sands, as well as other infrastructure projects across Canada and in Alberta. And the world is changing. We heard that today, and as well, David mentioned it too here in his presentation. But you think back a couple of years, we were in a peak oil situation around the world. That's no longer the case. New technology has been able to tap open new reservoirs. Unconventional gas has changed the landscape here in North America for supply of natural gas. And we're searching for new markets beyond just our traditional markets of the United States. They'll continue to be a key player as we move forward, but those new markets will be critical for our success as we continue into the next decade. And again, we're starting to see and continuing to see an increased need for the responsible component of energy development. And we're hearing that not only within Alberta, but across Canada and across the world. And that's starting to be an underlying theme in many of the policies that we're bringing forward. And again, we've seen so many great new technologies and innovations that are helping us position ourselves to develop these resources responsibly. We're looking at alternative forms of energy, whether it's wind, alternative biofuels, and other technologies that help abate some of the GHG emissions like CCS technology. So from Alberta government's perspective, Synergy plays a really key role in helping us develop and deliver the policies that will make sure that we develop these resources responsibly and that Albertans benefit from that. We look at a number of different policies that we're focusing on right now. I won't list them all, but I'll go through a couple of them. From a market access perspective, we're looking north, south, east, west, all directions to find new ways to deliver our product to new markets so we can capture the value for Albertans. We're looking at things like innovative, like the Canadian Energy Strategy, where we're not just focusing on Alberta, but we're looking beyond Alberta to our neighboring jurisdictions to see how we can work collaboratively to benefit from these situations. We've seen policy decisions such as electricity infrastructure to help support the backbone of our economy so that we can continue to position ourselves as a global leader. Other policies like land use framework and the single regulator to help support and develop these resources responsibly. And I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on the single regulator because I'm sure Jennifer will provide us with more details on that. But fundamentally, to all these pieces is the social license aspect. And that's important for the success of the projects locally and also globally. And David mentioned that we all play a role in that. So whether that's government, that's industry, or that's stakeholders, we all play a component in the social license and the approvals of these projects. So from a government standpoint, we view energy literacy as a key component to making sure that stakeholders understand these projects, these developments, and that we can have informed discussions about them. So we take a number of different roles in that. From an enabler, so as an example, we provide funding to organizations like Synergy Alberta here to help continue the dialogue. We do other things like in-kind resources, policy developments, and programs to help support that. We take the role as an information sharer. So we provide fact sheets and information and data on an open basis. And we also are a provider in the sense that we provide curriculum through education or information through tourism and parks and recreation. All avenues that you may not think are the traditional forms of energy literacy, but speak to the culture, the heritage, and the experience that we've had here in Alberta. So Synergy, why is it so important? Well, you can see from today and you can see from yesterday, it's about the dialogue. It's about the conversation. And it's about bringing forward new and creative ideas to find value for all parties. So again, key components like the respected dialogue, the open exchange of ideas, and the fact that we're listening to each other rather than just talking through each other. Synergy's focused on energy issues and the development and the focus around that. Synergy works to create a trusted, unbiased source of information which helps support energy literacy and broadens the knowledge base of all participants around the table and helps elevate the conversation. And it creates an environment where facts can be shared and with local communities and with local people who are playing within that community. And so it all supports the fundamental principle of effective engagement of communities. And we're looking at communities not just as the physical people in one spot, but sometimes the virtual communities as well as the people who may have an interest within that development. It's fascinating to hear the stories around the table. Some of the presentations were really moving to hear some of the experiences and some of the benefit and the positive things that some of the Synergy groups have been able to achieve. A couple that sort of stood out in my mind, the development of best practices, and a great way to showcase some of the innovative things that work and can be implemented across the province. Another one that was quite fascinating is the open houses that everybody has. And you think, well, it's just bringing people together and we're just sharing ideas, but it's beyond that. It's building the relationships. It's understanding what issues are out there, what values people have, and how we can work together in a collaborative way to make that happen. So I'm very, very pleased to be here tonight, especially since we were able to support this organization. I really encourage you to keep forward on the path that you're going. The social license element, the support, and the innovative solutions are going to be critical for us as we position ourselves not only for success today, but also for success in the future, and that we maintain this high quality, these standards, and the responsible development of our resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. We can already hear themes around the value of synergy and contributing to social license and energy literacy, and appreciate your comments too about the value of dialogue and what that brings, both to the listener and the speaker. So next we'll hear from Jennifer Stieber, who's the Executive Vice President at the Alberta Energy role, Executive Vice President of Stakeholder and Government Relations. And Jennifer has a broad history and level of experience within the government of Alberta, and she says nearly a quarter of a century, which makes it sound like a really long time. But she's in a new role in the new regulator, and we heard earlier today from Deborah Eastlick about the Alberta Energy Regulator moving to be best in class. So we'll be interested to hear how what Jennifer's take is on how Synergy can support the regulator in making that happen.
Thanks, Carla, and thank you for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues who I've spent years with. I was also a previous board member, and so it's always a pleasure to get back together with everybody. I also want to acknowledge all the staff who are here from the Alberta Energy Regulator. Deborah and others have spoken, and so I've already been warned, please do not repeat everything that they've said today. So I was dutifully striking out half of what I was given today. But I guess needless to say, we are huge supporters of Alberta, of the Synergy concept, of Synergy groups, and Synergy Alberta. And for the fundamental reason that we believe in the values of Synergy. We believe fundamentally in bringing people together in communities, and that's the full breadth of stakeholders that we're talking about. So not just industry, and not just individual landowners, but the collective, and I think that's what makes a difference in Alberta. We know that good relationships make a difference. We know that good communication. We're even trying to encourage our industry to go above and beyond what's sort of expected of them on a daily basis. And I know we sometimes get some reactions from industry, but we think that's a positive thing. We have a number of tools that we have in place, directives and others, but we really want to encourage that best in class that Deborah talked about today. So we obviously are actively participating in Synergy groups. We have staff out in the community, and I think that's really one of the things that gives huge distinction about what's happening in Alberta, that we're not superficial, we're not only operating at a very high level, we're actually in the community working with Albertans day in and day out. So for many of you who've been around, know that Synergy started with perhaps not quiet conversations in communities. They might have been a little more ruckus, but they started many, many years ago. And we've seen those ebb and flow, and in some communities, they might have had Synergy groups active some 15 years ago that then dissipated, but as technology changed, you know, you had another Synergy group come alive because the ability to develop the resources that Douglas and David have spoken about it are so vast and important. One of the things that does make Synergy, from my perspective, unique is the vast set of tools and resources that we have to deliver what we do in the communities. We've got hugely skilled staff at the Alberta Energy Regulator, and with the new organization, the growth in the new organization, expanding the number of field centers we're going to have, means we're going to be able to have more resources dedicated to doing that important work in the community. We also know that we can track the effectiveness of our business. We know that Synergy works because we get fewer complaints overall. We know that we have fewer either statements of objection or just objections in the process overall. And sometimes we can see it in the reduced number of hearings that we have. So obviously engaging with stakeholders is a huge priority. I wouldn't be sitting here. The organization wouldn't have dedicated a vision to stakeholder engagement and relations. And as David and Douglas have talked about, it's not only about Alberta. If we're going to be best in class, we have to be, and we are on the world stage, so we are going to be operating nationally and internationally. Deborah is our lead in Alberta. Part of her role will be to develop an engagement strategy. We know that's a two-way street. we're going to be very active in seeking your input on how you want to be engaged. And that ties in really closely with some of the work that government's doing along the same lines. How do we improve what government's doing and how stakeholders want to be engaged in policy development, and equally so in the regulatory world. So one of the things I should comment on is in that national international work, we do a lot of work in sharing our expertise, our regulatory strength, environmental performance with incoming delegations in the order of sometimes 40, 50, 70 a year. Gary Redmond and I actually just participated in a session with an Australian delegation, and I can't tell you how many of those groups are not only interested in what we're doing from a regulatory perspective, they're very interested in what we're doing from an engagement perspective. And we could have packed our bags the next morning, traveled to Australia, and I can tell you jurisdictions around the world are looking to us to share what we're doing, our best practices, those tools and experiences that we've got, because it is unique around the world. And unique to the point where not only is it evidence in how we're using that in the world of energy, that we can look across to other sectors, be it the forest sector, the land development sector, the agricultural sector, and they're picking up on the concept of synergy and applying it in their own way in their communities. So I'd just like to thank you again. I'm going to keep my remarks fairly short, and I'll turn it back to you, Carla. Okay. Thank you.
And thanks for highlighting some of those specific synergy wins, if you like, where you see fewer complaints or fewer statements of objection or fewer hearings even in some cases as a result of the synergy connection. So as we said earlier, we do want to open this up for questions, and we have some time for that, and we've got some folks with the mics. We've got Gay with the mic and Gay with the mic, I think is. Oh, sorry, Krista with the mic. And if you do have questions that you'd like to write on the paper that's on the, if there is paper on the tables or on a piece of paper, that's fine too. We'll take those. We'll ask you to be brief and to frame your question in the form of a question if you have one. And I'm actually going to start while you think of what your questions might be. I have one for the panel. And I'm wondering, it's been really interesting to hear how to see the value that you've observed from Synergy. And I wonder what you see as your role in helping others who are not in this room see the value of Synergy. So we've talked a little bit about the international context, but what about the companies that aren't in the room today or the communities that aren't represented here? You know, what's the role of CAP and the AER and Alberta Energy to help some of those folks see the value of Synergy?
I'll start, sure. I think one of the fundamental reasons CAP exists is it is a vehicle to help companies talk to each other and communicate with each other. And when we engage in entities like this, we talk to our members about what it is. I mean, quite frankly, there's a budget that comes with our engagement in this. And so there's a fiscal discussion that says we want to do this. We think there's strong merit in this. And the budget gets approved year over year. So I think the fact that the association as a whole sees a value proposition here, I think is good. But also the fact that we talk about it, it just kind of expands the knowledge across our membership that this entity exists. And I think the other thing is, I think there's sort of peer sharing that goes on as well. I go to different events and different things, and I run into the same person, Darcy over there, in different places, but it's often with different companies in the room. So I think there's sort of nodes of communication that spin off as a result of this as well. So less direct in its intent, but it is that sort of ability for it to spread across the industry as well. And so where we see this and where we hear good stories about this, companies want to engage in that. They want to be part of that that kind of a collaborative approach. Because believe you me, it's not very comfortable when you are on the receiving end of some fairly negative comments. Some of them may be justified, but it's a far better approach if you get a pointed message, but you get it in a way that makes you want to feel that you're part of the group and part of trying to find some solutions.
Yeah, maybe I'll add to that. I think the benefit of, I'll call it grassroots or staff in the communities, is we're very cognizant of who the active players are. And we're also cognizant of the new companies or new operators that come into the communities. And we are looking for ways to share the experience of the synergy groups. This isn't a mandatory thing, but again, as you say, David, it is an opportunity for us to showcase the difference that they can make by being in the community and getting involved and understanding that it's not an in and out, that you should understand what it means to be part of a community. You should understand the life cycle of energy development, and that's a critical for us as a new organization with a new mandate and bringing in the functions from Environment and Sustainable Resource Development. We are going to have a keener eye to what that life cycle looks like and that oversight, and we're going to be reinforcing those kinds of values with companies. And just to reinforce what you said about being in other venues, be they Alberta or national, at least for an Alberta engagement strategy, we are going to be keen to talk to companies that may or may not be members of CAP.
It's really, it's great examples they've been showcasing as well, but these issues and challenges around development, whether it's energy or infrastructure, are not just happening in Alberta, they're happening across Canada. So when we're engaging with other provinces in the Canadian energy discussions, or whether through other forums like energy minds and ministers with the federal government involved, they're dealing with similar types of issues and challenges. We're all looking for ways that we can develop innovative solutions that come up with better approaches to it. And this is a great example where they've taken unique little situations, they've engaged in a proactive manner, we're including a more effective dialogue, and we're working together to co-create solutions as we move forward. And that's just an outstanding approach. At the end, it makes the process less confrontational, it helps to develop a better solution, and in the end, we all have a better value created out of the engagement that we've done. It isn't a short-term process, it's a long-term process that takes time. It is building relationships. I know that's tough, but it's such a great win that we have here, and I think that we've got such an outstanding foundation here that we can leverage across Alberta, but we can also leverage it across Canada as well.
Okay, thanks for talking about that from your perspective as funders, but also as ambassadors, if you like, for Synergy in Alberta. I can't quite see if Gay or Krista have any, if you're holding the mic for anybody there. Not yet. I do have a couple of written questions here. Okay. One question here is, should Synergy be mandatory for the potential participants? What are your views on that? And again, this could be for any of you.
I'm going to let the regulator start with that.
So not an undiscussed topic before. I think right now we have Directive 56 that speaks to our expectations around engagement. I know when the board of directors have met with stakeholders across the province, that's a topic that's being raised with them. So I think they're probably scratching their heads somewhat, thinking about, do we take another step? I'm not going to suggest that moving to a mandatory is what we should or shouldn't do. I think there's a lot of opportunity through our development of an Alberta engagement strategy to have exactly that kind of dialogue. It must be speaking to some constituents who don't feel that enough is being done, right? So I think we need to explore that.
I think the mandatory model is, in fact, the regulatory process. And actually, nobody wants to go through a regulatory process that involves hearings. And so that mandatory aspect is in place if it ever comes to that. I think I would rather consider Synergy as a best practice. And if it's a best practice and if the results are there for all the stakeholders, then I think people will actually just naturally gravitate to that. Mandatory, I think, poses the risks of the relationship and relationship building. If I have to do it, then it's okay, I do it. But if it's there and the value proposition is I gather and gain relationships, which I think is a more enduring kind of solution, I think that's a better approach to it.
Yeah, it's really about the outcome, I think, that we're trying to achieve here. As soon as you make it mandatory, you go down that route, you risk losing the flexibility. And that flexibility, I think, is what's been so successful, because you've been able to take different approaches in different areas based on the different issues and the values there. So that's a very key component that I think that we'd want to make sure that we still have that flexibility as we move forward.
I think the other thing is if you get good outcomes and you're participating in it and others aren't, you've got a competitive advantage in terms of that relationship. So that'll signal to other companies to be part of it. If it's successful for some of the landowners, the others may look at that and say, well, yeah, maybe that is something I want to participate in as well.
Okay, thank you. I've got a number of questions here, and I hope we can get through them all. And I've got two that kind of go together, and I'll start with this one for the Alberta Energy Regulator. The question is, what might we see that would be different under the Alberta Energy Regulator? And I think specifically with respect to stakeholder engagement, if we can direct it to that topic.
Sure. So I think, well, fundamentally having a division that's going to dedicate some resources to stakeholder engagement is going to be fundamentally different. We have not ventured in a significant, planned, sort of thoughtful way outside of Alberta. So that's a fundamental difference from my perspective. I think we have lots to learn from other jurisdictions also. And we will be working with government, other organizations to develop a national plan as well as an international plan. We have done some preliminary work around not just best practices, but what are those principles of engagement that cut across all jurisdictions, Alberta, again, national and international. And so I think part of that is going to be, that's part of the work that's going to be different. I think another area that we need to really think about is how do we evaluate our effectiveness in engagement? That's a very difficult subject to tackle, but I think it's necessary. I think Albertans want to know that, and we as a regulator want to know if we're successful. Have we moved the bar in a positive direction so that the outcomes, as Douglas talked about, are being met for everybody? So those would be two examples that I give of how I think we're going to be different.
Thank you. And you've touched on another question, Jennifer, that I'm going to segue into. And that is, we've heard how other jurisdictions across the world are looking to Alberta and to the AER for leadership on engagement and regulation of an extremely active oil and gas industry. How are jurisdictions outside of Alberta and Canada going to inform Alberta about stakeholder engagement and energy regulations? You touched on learning from other jurisdictions, and the question is, what are you going to take and how will you learn from other jurisdictions outside of Alberta and Canada?
Well, I think as part of having a strategy itself, that's the entire purpose. We were just in the United States and we were engaging with organizations that, quite frankly, we've shied away from before. And I think that whole concept of being more open and more transparent means we're going to have to take some risks. We're going to have dialogues with organizations where I think we're going to benefit from really understanding what their issues are, what their values are, and how they're going to influence what we do in Alberta and abroad.
So we'll take Jennifer off the hot seat for a minute and turn to Dave and ask a question for CAP and the industry. What do you expect from the Alberta Energy Regulator?
In terms of its sort of reinvention as coming out of the RCB and becoming the AER, the things that we were looking for with respect to that change was to have them focus on the regulatory world and have government focus on the policy world. I think by putting the regulator all in one place gives a broad knowledge across the regulator of all of the regulatory requirements. It also gives us one place to go when we look to get our projects reviewed and approved. And I think that notion holds true for anybody who's watching what we're doing. They now have one place to go to as the single regulator. The thing we were clear on when we were saying, advocating that change like this should occur is that regulator then still needs to be accountable back to government with respect to delivering on the legislation and the policies that government would bring to bear. So for example, as they do regional planning, the departments do regional planning, and the outcomes of that get described, the regulator then needs to figure out how they regulate any requirements associated with that, but then should be reporting back to government in some fashion around, or government should be looking into the regulator in some fashion to see how those policies are being met. I think there's been in my mind, there's been a bit of a gap from time to time too, in the past where a regulator may be looking to have to make a decision where government hasn't turned its mind to a specific policy yet. And so I think bless you, I think, sorry, I think there's a need, I think there was a need to have government be more aggressive, more active in the policy design place. And I think they've set that up through this new regulator, new policy management office initiative that they put in place.
Okay, thanks. I think we have a question there, Krista, do we?
Allowed to hold the microphone. Peter Doby, the Farmers Advocate. We're hearing about the value of synergy, and I think the funders all agree by writing checks that there is some value to Synergy Alberta and the synergy groups, and you all get benefits out of it. At our office, what we are hearing is a concern that I think will impact the value of the brand of synergy. And that concern is most of what's done at the synergy level is after the fact, after a decision has been made about a license, about a project. So what we're hearing is a great deal of concern about notice. What people are asking us is, what would a best-in-class regulator do about adequacy of notice in terms of timeliness? How much time will the stakeholders who are the landowners, frankly, they're my constituents, farmers and ranchers, how much time will they have? What's the manner of notice? And I understand that the regulator is working on that. And third, what is the scope of notice? There is a great deal of concern among landowners in relation to a fear of a narrow definition of directly and adversely affected. There is a hunger that adjacent landowners need to have notice. So my question is for, I guess, Deborah as well, but Jennifer, can you commit as an executive vice president to help our Farmers Advocate office answer the questions quickly as to what form of notice and to work with us to build that information piece for the farmers and ranchers? Thanks.
So thanks, good question. Part of the consultation that we've just gone through is to do exactly that, to try and help define the rules of practice around what notice is going to be, how notice will take place, you know, what's that interaction between landowners and the regulator. So yes, I think we can get you some answers. I've got to tell you though, it's literally as it were, in the process, government contemplating whether the drafts that have been created for them are what they're prepared to support, or whether they're wanting to make any modifications to that. So it would be inappropriate for me to comment on the very, very specifics, but that is going to be coming out of the gate before the end of, our hope is before the end of November, we are going to have all of that in place. And as we roll out our communications, that'll be to Albertans across the board, and we'll be able to explicitly answer those questions. So I'm not trying to be evasive, but I don't actually have those answers as of yet.
I've got another couple questions here, and I'll try just to fit in one more if we can. I know we're close to our finishing time. We do have a question here that's, I think, on the minds of many Albertans. It's more of a policy question about Alberta. And the question is around, can Alberta build a refinery to create sustainable employment for Albertans? And why do natural resources need to be shipped out of the province? And I expect this is a question that probably comes up frequently at Synergy Group discussions. So I'd just ask the panelists if you'd be able to provide some insight around that.
Certainly. So obviously the value-added sector is a key component of what we're trying to achieve here in Alberta. You can look back to our 2008 provincial energy strategy. That was one of the key pillars and within that strategy. Since then, we've taken a number of different steps to encourage that type of value-added activity here in the province. Things like the incremental ethane extraction program, which helps support new ethane supplies for the petrochemical sector here, helps to support the streaming and extraction of that liquids-rich gas here in Alberta so that it helps support investment and jobs here in Alberta. In addition to that, we've looked at other tools such as bitumen royalty in kind and the ability to support a new refinery here in Alberta, the Northwest Upgrader Refinery. A very innovative project where we're taking gasification technology to gasify bitumen bottoms to support the refinery of that product to produce diesel and high-valued product here in Western Canada and specifically here in Alberta. So that's a key component of it. The other interesting thing about that refinery is that we're also having carbon capture and storage equipment put onto that to capture the CO2 emissions. Those will be compressed, transported via a new pipeline, and used for enhanced oil recovery. So another big win of reducing the GHG emissions associated with that barrel of oil that's refined and also being used as a tool to help support more economic activity through increased oil production and optimizing our basin production.
Thanks, Doug. And I think we have one more question at the back here. Gay, do we?
Okay. Dave Brown from Chairman of SPOG. And I guess this question is for Dave, because I've already mentioned and had a conversation with the Alberta regulator already. There seems to be a real gap between the junior companies that just skim along the bottom of the regulations and our members that are mostly cap people. So we got a not very unfair playing field. What is your feeling about closing that up? And what is industry's feeling?
So Dave, hi, I haven't seen you in a long time. And you're just a shadow out there, by the way. Thanks for the question. CAP feels very strongly about trying to keep a level playing field, so we work with our members on best practices and those sorts of things. We obviously can't do a lot for the non-members, other than when we get into dialogues about developing best practices, like we did for hydraulic fracturing. We also talk to the regulator and say, you know, we think this is a good piece of work. We're getting support for it from the communities out there and communities in a broad sense. I think everybody but Thomas Mulcair thought they were a good idea. So we would go to the regulator and say, we wouldn't mind if you chose to regulate something like this, or if you want to look at this and see if it is something that with modifications would make sense to you. So we're trying to lead into some of that as we anticipate the issues and questions that the public have, and our members are certainly engaged in wanting to sort of bootstrap their own performance. It's to our benefit to see that happen, quite frankly, that the playing field is level. In some respects, it's a competitive advantage if we're better than others, but when we get into this notion of social license, everybody gets judged often by the lowest common denominator. I think if there is a regulatory deficiency, a performance deficiency, by all means there should be a regulatory response. If there is a need for some assistance, perhaps there's a role for synergy groups in this as well. If you bring these companies into the synergy world, they can see what's going on, they can see what people are talking about and asking for. Perhaps synergy can play a role in that as well. We've talked about this a number of times, Dave, I know, and it's our desire would be to see a more level playing field.
Yesterday and today, I found that so many things are being affected by poor performance of some companies and good performance by others. And it's very difficult when a synergy group, say like SPOG, who do a lot of negotiation between companies and landowners, when over 80% of the complaints that come in are from those junior companies skimming along the bottom line. And I think closing that up a bit would make a big difference to the credibility of both the industry, the regulatory board, and all the community. I really think that is everything I hear, that's one of the things that is an issue. And if we can get rid of some of the issues, I believe we can solve a lot of the problems. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. So there is value in synergy, and the work is not done yet. I think that's the message that we're hearing from you tonight, Dave. We are at the end of our time here, and so I'm going to close this panel, and I hope you'll join me in thanking Jennifer, Dave, and Doug tonight.